The cargo bay of the Stellar Dawn smelled like metal and hydraulic fluid, same as always. First Mate Carvex checked the manifest on his datapad for the third time that morning, his 4 eyes scanning the loading procedure with practiced efficiency. Behind him, the human engineer Sarah Mitchell was calibrating the plasma couplings on Bay Door 7, her movements quick and precise despite the extra weight she carried. On her back, secured in some kind of fabric contraption the humans called a carrier, was a human infant. The small creature couldn't have been more than a standard cycle-old, with tiny fists that occasionally grabbed at Sarah's hair and a face that seemed capable of only 2 expressions, sleeping or screaming. Carvex glanced at them, then immediately looked away. The rest of the crew had adopted the same strategy over the past 3 planetary rotations since Sarah had returned from emergency leave. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody asked questions. The human worked, and they worked around the situation. "Coupling 7 is reading stable," Sarah called out, making a notation on her own pad. The infant on her back made a small gurgling sound. She reached back with one hand, adjusted something, and continued working without breaking stride. The Vryn cargo master, Thesic, slithered past with a hover pallet of deuterium cores. His serpentine body allowed him to move smoothly through the cramped spaces between containers. He passed within centimeters of Sarah and the infant, his heat-sensing organs surely detecting both life forms, but his expression remained neutral. He simply nodded to her and continued on his path. This was the way of things now. Captain Varos, a grizzled Corthan with silver fur and battle scars from his military days, had set the tone when Sarah first returned to duty. She'd appeared at the morning briefing with the infant strapped to her chest in the carrier, her jaw set in a way that suggested she expected an argument. The whole crew had been there. Carvex, Thesic, Medical Officer Dr. Yana, Navigator Pix, and the 3 junior engineers. Sarah had stood at attention and delivered her status report as if nothing was different. The infant had slept through the entire thing, making small huffing noises against her uniform. Captain Varos had listened, asked 3 questions about the status of the port engine calibrations, and dismissed everyone to their duties. Not a single word about the tiny human attached to Sarah's torso. The rest of the crew had followed his lead instantly. By the second day, it had become normal. In the engine room, Sarah worked on the main reactor coupling while the infant watched the blinking lights with wide, unfocused eyes. Junior Engineer Plotz, a young Corthan who barely reached Sarah's shoulder, handed her tools as she requested them without ever acknowledging the small passenger. When the infant began to fuss, reaching a pitch that made Plotz's ears flatten against his head, Sarah simply stepped away from the reactor, swung the carrier around to her front, and handled whatever the infant needed. Plotz continued the calibration work, following her verbal instructions until she returned to the panel 5 minutes later. "Thanks for covering," Sarah said, settling back into position. "The frequency modulation was straightforward," Plotz replied, tapping his datapad. His large eyes flicked toward the infant for a fraction of a second, then back to the readouts. "We should check the secondary relays." The galley was where things got interesting. Dr. Yana, the ship's Pilvan medical officer, had taken to preparing certain foods and leaving them on the counter near the replicator. They were always soft, mashed things in small containers, appearing without comment or fanfare. Sarah would find them, nod her thanks to whoever was in the galley at the time, and the containers would be empty by the next shift. Nobody mentioned that Pilvan were known across the galaxy as specialists in pediatric care. Nobody commented that Dr. Yana had started keeping her medical bay stocked with supplies sized for impossibly small humans. The first time the infant had spiked a fever, Sarah had brought her to the med bay at 0300 hours. And Dr. Yana had been ready with equipment that definitely hadn't been on the ship 2 weeks ago. "Viral infection," Dr. Yana had said, running a scanner over the infant's flushed face. "Common in human young. I've synthesized an appropriate medication." Sarah's relief had been visible. "I didn't know if we'd have—" "The fever will break within 4 hours," Dr. Yana interrupted, handing her a small vial. "Dosage is marked. Return if symptoms worsen." The infant had recovered right on schedule. Navigator Pix was perhaps the most interesting case. The Zentari pilot had 17 crystalline sensory organs arranged around her spherical head, giving her 360 degrees of vision at all times. There was literally no way she could not see the infant during bridge duty. Yet Pix would deliver course correction data to Sarah when needed, discussing gravitational calculations and jump point alignments with perfect professionalism, while the infant drooled on the console during tummy time on a blanket Sarah had spread across an unused station. "We're approaching the Deneb Junction in 47 minutes, Pix announced during one such shift. "Engineering should prepare for gradient stress on the main deflectors." "Compensators are already tuned," Sarah replied, typing with one hand while the other steadied the infant, who had discovered the fascinating game of trying to roll off the blanket. "We'll handle the transition smoothly." "Excellent." Pix's sensory organs sparkled with what might have been approval. The crew's coordinated obliviousness reached its peak during the inspection by Admiral Cranks of the Galactic Commerce Authority. The Admiral, a stickler for regulations with a reputation for finding violations where none existed, came aboard to verify their shipping certifications for the Outer Rim route. Captain Varos met him at the airlock with full ceremony, and the crew assembled for the formal review. Sarah stood in the line, the infant babbling cheerfully against her back, tiny hands waving at nothing in particular. Admiral Cranks walked slowly down the line, his mechanical eye whirring as it scanned each crew member. He stopped directly in front of Sarah. "Engineer Mitchell," he said, his voice like gravel in a processor. "Sir?" Sarah replied crisply. The Admiral's eye whirred, focusing. The infant grabbed a fistful of Sarah's hair and pulled. Sarah didn't flinch. The Admiral's regular eye and mechanical eye both tracked the movement. "Your engine efficiency ratings have improved by 12% over the last quarter," the Admiral stated. "Yes, sir. I implemented a new plasma flow distribution algorithm." "Impressive." The Admiral moved on to the next crew member without another word. Later, in the captain's ready room, Carvex had asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Sir, about the Admiral." "The Admiral saw what he needed to see," Captain Varos said, pouring 2 glasses of Corthan brandy. "An efficient crew maintaining a ship that exceeds standards. Everything else is background noise." That was the key, Carvex realized. The infant wasn't invisible. Everyone saw her clearly, but she had simply become part of the ship's operation, like the hum of the engines or the recycled air. Not ignored, but integrated. The shift changes were particularly telling. When Sarah's duty hours ended, she would transfer responsibilities to the next engineer without ceremony. The infant might be sleeping or awake, might be quiet or fussing, but the handoff of duties proceeded with mechanical precision. The other engineers would arrive early or stay late to ensure coverage, creating a rotation that accommodated Sarah's need to occasionally step away for infant care without any formal schedule being posted or discussed. It happened organically, the way good crews functioned. Thesic would volunteer for cargo duty during the ship's night cycle when Sarah needed sleep. Plots would take the early reactor checks. Pix would adjust navigation briefings to coincide with the infant's longer sleep periods. Dr. Yana maintained medical logs that somehow never mentioned the ship's smallest passenger, but always reflected perfect health monitoring for all crew members. The only time anyone came close to acknowledging the situation directly was during a meteor storm in the Kasser Belt. The ship took minor damage, nothing critical, but enough to require all hands on emergency protocols. Sarah had been in the middle of feeding the infant when the alarms sounded. She'd appeared on the bridge within 90 seconds, the infant still in the carrier, but now strapped to Sarah's back instead of front, secured with what looked like emergency tether cables in addition to the fabric carrier. Her hands had been free to work the emergency engineering console, rerouting power and coordinating hull repairs, while the infant watched the flashing red lights with what might have been fascination. When the danger passed and the ship limped toward the nearest station for proper repairs, Captain Varos had made his only direct comment about the arrangement. "Engineer Mitchell," he'd said, standing beside her at the console while the rest of the crew managed post-crisis procedures. "Sir. Good work securing all critical equipment during the emergency." Sarah's expression hadn't changed. "All critical equipment remains secured, sir. We're ready for any additional threats." "That's what I like to hear." The captain had walked away, and that was that. The pattern continued through docking procedures at Starbase Quintus, through a 3-day resupply operation, and into the next leg of their trade route. The infant grew, as human young apparently did. She became more alert, making different sounds, developing what Dr. Yana's medical texts called motor control. Sarah modified her carrier arrangement, adjusting for increased weight and movement. Nobody commented on the changes. The breaking point, if it could be called that, came during shore leave on Tiberian IV. Half the crew had gone down to the planet for recreation. Sarah had stayed aboard, as usual, working on preventive maintenance that could be done while docked. Carvex had also remained behind, catching up on administrative duties that never seemed to end. He'd found Sarah in the engine room at midnight, station time. The infant was awake, unusually fussy, making sounds that Carvex's translator couldn't properly interpret, but which clearly indicated distress. Sarah was trying to work on a plasma relay with one hand while supporting the infant with the other, her face showing the first real cracks in her professional composure that Carvex had seen since she'd returned to duty. "The resonance frequency is off," Sarah muttered, more to herself than to him. "It's a simple fix. Just needs recalibration, but I need both hands for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. The infant's crying increased in volume. Carvex stood at the entrance to the engine room watching. By all protocols, by all the careful pretense the crew had maintained, he should turn around and leave. He should act like he hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything. Instead, he walked forward and held out his 4 arms. "I can hold stabilization tools," he said, "if you guide the calibration verbally." Sarah looked at him, then at the relay, then back at him. Something unspoken passed between them. She unstrapped the infant and, with the careful precision of someone handling unexploded ordnance, transferred the small, crying human to Carvex's upper set of arms. The infant felt impossibly fragile. Carvex's species could bench press 300 kilos, could survive in thin atmospheres and heavy gravity. This creature weighed perhaps 6 or 7 kilos and seemed constructed of soft tissue that might break if handled incorrectly. He held her with extreme care, supporting the head as he'd seen Sarah do, keeping her secure against his chest. Sarah turned to the relay panel and worked with both hands free. Her movements were faster now, more certain. The calibration took perhaps 90 seconds. The infant continued crying, the sound reverberating in Carvex's chest in a way that activated instincts he hadn't known his species possessed. "Done," Sarah said, closing the panel. She turned back and carefully reclaimed the infant, strapping her back into the carrier with practiced efficiency. The crying gradually subsided into hiccuping sounds. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. Carvex nodded. The frequency modulation should hold for another 3 months. Good to hear. They stood there for a moment, the hum of the engines filling the silence. "Her name is Emma," Sarah said suddenly. "My sister died. Shuttle accident. I'm all she has." Carvex processed this information. "Emma is fortunate," he said finally. "I can't lose this job," Sarah continued, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. "I need the salary for her care. I need the shipboard housing. I contacted command about family crew quarters, but the waiting list is 2 years long. I tried to find childcare at the stations, but the cost is more than I make. And who would I trust with her? She's 3 months old. 3 months. She needs me. I need this job. I didn't know what else to do. So you came back to work, Carvex said. So I came back to work, Sarah echoed. And I waited for someone to report me, to cite regulations, to tell me it was unacceptable. And instead we have a crew member performing her duties at 97% efficiency, Carvex said, which is still higher than 2 of our other engineers. Sarah let out a breath that might have been a laugh. You all knew the whole time. We saw what we needed to see, Carvex said, echoing the captain's words from the admiral's visit. We see an engineer who shows up, does her work, and keeps our engines running better than they've run in years. Everything else is irrelevant. Emma made a small sound, already falling asleep against Sarah's chest. But now you know her name, Sarah said. Now I know her name, Carvex agreed. He paused at the engine room entrance. The captain's standing order is that all crew members should have what they need to perform their duties effectively. If there are resources required for optimal performance, engineering should submit requests through the normal channels. Sarah understood immediately. I'll prepare a requisition list. See that you do. Carvex left before the emotion on Sarah's face could progress further. The next morning, a requisition appeared in his queue. Specialized safety equipment, environmental monitoring gear, nutritional supplies, and an expanded engineering quarters allocation. Every item was justified with technical reasoning related to crew efficiency and ship operations. Carvex approved it all and forwarded it to the captain without comment. 3 days later, cargo arrived from the station, a compact sleeping unit rated for infant humans, a supply of nutritional supplements, and various safety devices that could be mounted in engineering spaces. The quartermaster logged everything as operational equipment. Nobody mentioned what it was actually for. Emma continued growing, and the crew continued not seeing her. Except, of course, they all did. They saw her when Thesic modified cargo bay safety protocols to account for smaller beings who might wander into spaces designed for adults. They saw her when Pix programmed the ship's environmental controls to maintain optimal temperature and humidity in engineering. They saw her when Dr. Yana added human pediatric specialist to her official credentials list. They saw her when Captain Veros authorized extended breaks for Sarah's shifts without reducing her pay or status. They saw her, acknowledged her existence through action rather than words, and made space for her in their crew. Because that was what good crews did. They adapted. They supported their own. They focused on what mattered, keeping the ship running, completing their missions, and taking care of each other. Everything else was just details, and if those details included a human infant who shouldn't technically be aboard, but who was becoming as much a part of the Stellar Dawn as its engines, well, the crew acted like they didn't see a thing.